I wasn't trying to hurt him when I told Alex I wanted two boyfriends. I know how that sounds to conventional people, but hear me out. One man simply can't meet all of a woman's complex emotional and physical needs. That's just biology and psychology. I was being progressive and honest about human nature instead of living a lie like most couples do. That Thursday evening started peacefully enough. Alex and I were curled up on our couch, watching some mindless Netflix show, and I was feeling particularly close to him. He'd been sweet and attentive all week, bringing me coffee in the mornings and listening to my work stress without trying to fix everything. But as we sat there in comfortable silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from our relationship. Don't get me wrong, Alex was amazing in many ways. He was emotionally intelligent, financially stable, and genuinely cared about my happiness. But our physical chemistry had plateaued after 8 months together, and I found myself fantasizing about the excitement and passion I'd experienced with other partners. I believed I deserved to have both emotional security and physical fulfillment, not just one or the other. I'd been thinking about this concept for weeks, doing research online about polyamory and open relationships. I'd read articles about how monogamy was an outdated social construct that didn't reflect human nature. People aren't naturally designed to get all their needs met by one person. That's why divorce rates are so high and infidelity is so common. I wanted to be honest about my needs instead of ending up resentful or unfaithful. During a commercial break, I turned to Alex and told him I'd been thinking about our relationship structure. I explained that I loved what we had together, but I was realizing I had needs that maybe one person couldn't fulfill completely. I said I was wondering if we could explore having a more open arrangement where we could both seek different types of connection with different people. Alex muted the TV and gave me his full attention, which I appreciated. He asked me to explain exactly what I meant, so I told him about my research into polyamory and modern relationship models. I said I thought I might benefit from having two boyfriends, one who could provide emotional support and stability like Alex did, and another who could offer physical passion and excitement that our relationship had been lacking lately. I made it clear that this wasn't about him being inadequate or failing me in any way. I said he was wonderful at providing emotional connection and security, but that I also craved intense physical experiences that required a different type of energy. I explained that having both types of relationships would actually make me happier and more fulfilled, which would benefit our connection too. Alex listened without interrupting, but I could see something shifting in his expression. When I finished explaining my idea, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that should have been a warning. If you can have more than one person to meet your needs, then so can I. I thought he was just processing the concept and maybe feeling a little defensive. I told him that of course the arrangement would be reciprocal. I wasn't asking for something I wouldn't be willing to give him too. I said the whole point was for both of us to be honest about our desires, instead of pretending we never thought about other people. He nodded slowly and said he needed some time to think about everything I'd shared. I was relieved that he wasn't getting angry or possessive like some men would. I thought his calm response showed real emotional maturity and openness to growth. I told him I appreciated how thoughtful he was being about such a big conversation. The rest of the evening felt normal enough. We finished watching our show and went to bed without any tension or awkwardness. Alex even kissed me goodnight the way he always did. I felt hopeful that we were going to be able to navigate this transition together, like mature adults who cared about each other's happiness. Over the next few days, Alex was quieter than usual, but not in a way that seemed angry or upset. He was still affectionate and attentive, still did all the little things that made him such a good boyfriend. I interpreted his thoughtfulness as him seriously considering my proposal and trying to figure out how to make it work for both of us. I started browsing dating apps and online communities for people interested in ethical non-monogamy. I was careful to be upfront about my situation, that I had a primary partner but was looking for someone to fulfill different needs. I was excited about the possibility of finding someone who could bring back that sense of excitement and adventure I'd been missing. About a week after our conversation, I'd started chatting with a few interesting men online. There was David, a personal trainer who was incredibly attractive and seemed to understand the physical side of what I was looking for. And there was Michael, a musician with this creative intensity that I found really appealing. Both seemed open to non-traditional relationship structures. Alex continued to be supportive and understanding about my exploration. He asked occasional questions about how I was feeling about everything, and I appreciated that he was checking in with my emotional state rather than trying to control or stop what I was doing. I told him about the men I was talking to, being completely transparent about my process. I was proud of how maturely we were handling such a potentially complicated situation. Most couples would have fought or broken up over something like this, but Alex and I were proving that two people who really love each other can work through anything with honest communication and mutual respect. Alex mentioned that he was also thinking about what it might mean for him to explore connections with other people. I encouraged him to take his time, figuring out what he wanted, reminding him that this was supposed to be about both of us getting our needs met. I said I'd be supportive of whatever he decided, as long as we maintained our primary connection. I arranged to meet David for coffee that weekend to see if there was real chemistry between us in person. I was nervous but excited about the possibility of adding this new dimension to my life. Alex said he hoped I had a good time and that he'd probably spend the day working on some projects around the apartment. The coffee date with David went better than I'd expected. He was even more attractive in person, and we had this immediate physical tension that had been missing from my relationship with Alex. We talked about fitness and travel and shared interests, and I could feel myself getting excited about the possibility of exploring this connection further. When I got home that evening, Alex asked how my date had gone. I was honest about feeling attracted to David and thinking there might be potential there. Alex nodded and said he was glad I'd had a positive experience. He seemed genuinely supportive, which made me feel even more confident that we were handling this situation in a healthy way. Over dinner, Alex mentioned that he'd been thinking about our earlier conversation and was starting to understand what I meant about different people meeting different needs. He said he'd actually reached out to a few people himself to explore what options might be available to him. I was thrilled that he was embracing the concept instead of fighting it. I asked if he wanted to tell me about anyone he was talking to, but he said he was still in early stages and preferred to wait until things were more developed. I respected his need for privacy and told him I was proud of how open-minded he was being about everything. That night, we made love with more passion than we'd had in months. I think the excitement of exploring new possibilities had rekindled something between us. I felt like we were both getting energized by the prospect of growth and adventure, and it was actually improving our connection rather than threatening it. The next week, I had a second date with David that went even better than the first. We went to dinner and then back to his apartment, where the physical chemistry I'd been hoping for definitely materialized. It was exactly the kind of intense, passionate experience I'd been craving. I felt like I was rediscovering a part of myself that had been dormant. When I came home late that night, Alex was already asleep. I felt grateful that I could explore this new connection without having to sneak around or lie about it. I was getting the best of both worlds, emotional security with Alex and physical excitement with David. It seemed like the perfect arrangement for someone with complex needs like mine. For the next month, everything seemed to be working exactly as I'd hoped. My relationship with Alex remained stable and comfortable, while my connection with David provided the excitement and passion I'd been missing. I was happier and more fulfilled than I'd been in months, which I thought proved that my approach to relationships was healthy and progressive. Alex continued to be supportive of my exploration, never making me feel guilty or pressured about spending time with David. He'd started going out more in the evenings himself, which I assumed meant he was also meeting people and figuring out what he wanted from this new arrangement. I was glad he was taking advantage of the opportunity rather than just waiting around for me. I'd also started seeing Michael occasionally for more intellectually stimulating dates. He was different from both Alex and David, offering creative conversation and artistic inspiration that fed a different part of my soul. I felt like I was becoming a more complete person by allowing different men to bring out different aspects of my personality. My friends had mixed reactions when I told them about my relationship situation. Some thought I was being selfish and unrealistic, while others admired my honesty and courage to pursue what I really wanted. I tried to ignore the judgment from people who were stuck in traditional mindsets and focus on the support from friends who understood that relationships could take many forms. Alex had become even more attentive and romantic during this period, which surprised me. I'd expected him to become more distant or possessive, but instead, he seemed more present and appreciative of our time together. He brought me flowers randomly, cooked elaborate dinners, and planned special date nights that reminded me why I'd fallen for him in the first place. I thought maybe having other outlets for different needs was actually strengthening our core relationship. When I was with Alex, I could focus entirely on the emotional and intellectual connection we shared without feeling frustrated about missing physical passion. It seemed like everyone was getting what they needed without anyone having to compromise or sacrifice. Alex mentioned a few times that he was enjoying meeting new people and exploring different types of connections. He never gave me specific details, but he seemed happier and more energetic than he'd been in months. I was proud that we'd found a way to grow individually while maintaining our partnership. One evening, Alex suggested that maybe we should have a dinner party to celebrate how well our new arrangement was working out. He said he'd like to cook for me and some of the important people in my life. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to acknowledge our growth and share our happiness with others. We decided to invite my sister Emma and my mother, since they were the family members I was closest to. I'd told them both about my relationship situation, and while they'd had some concerns initially, they seemed to be accepting that this was what made me happy. Alex said he was looking forward to getting to know them better. I was touched by how much effort Alex put into planning the dinner party. He spent all day Saturday shopping for ingredients and preparing an elaborate meal. He bought flowers for the table and even got a nice bottle of wine to celebrate. I felt lucky to have a partner who was so supportive of my happiness and willing to embrace the people who mattered to me. Emma and my mother arrived right on time, both dressed nicely for the occasion. I was excited to show them how happy and fulfilled I was, how well my unconventional approach to relationships was working out. I wanted them to see that Alex and I were stronger than ever, despite, or maybe because of, our openness to other connections. The conversation during dinner was lively and warm. Alex was charming and attentive to both Emma and my mother, asking them about their lives and interests. I could see them warming up to him and beginning to understand why I cared about him so much. It felt like the perfect evening to demonstrate how mature and successful our relationship had become. After dinner, I offered to make coffee while Alex cleared the table. Emma and my mother were both complimenting the meal and saying how impressed they were with Alex's cooking skills. I felt proud and grateful to have such wonderful people in my life who were willing to support my choices even when they didn't fully understand them. I was just starting the coffee maker when I realized I'd left my phone upstairs. I'd been expecting a text from David about our plans for the next day, so I decided to run up quickly to grab it. The house was quiet, except for the sounds of Alex cleaning up in the kitchen and my mother and Emma chatting in the dining room. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something that made me pause. There were voices coming from our bedroom, not just one voice, but multiple voices. And they weren't just talking. There was laughter, intimate whispers, and sounds that made my stomach drop with a terrible realization. I approached our bedroom door slowly, my heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and dread. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see movement on our bed. What I saw next will be burned into my memory forever. Alex was in our bed with two women, not just any two women, my sister Emma and my mother. They were all naked, intertwined in ways that made me physically ill to witness. Alex looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, and instead of showing shock or shame, he smiled with a cold satisfaction I'd never seen from him before. "I'm just meeting my needs too," he said calmly, as if he was explaining something obvious to a child. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't process what I was seeing or hearing. My boyfriend was in bed with my mother and sister, and he was acting like this was a perfectly reasonable response to our conversation about open relationships. Emma sat up in bed, not bothering to cover herself, and looked at me with this smug expression that made my blood turn cold. "What's wrong?" she said. "I thought you believed in people exploring their needs with multiple partners." My mother actually laughed, as she pulled a sheet around herself. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," she said. "At least we're honest about it instead of pretending we don't have desires." I finally found my voice and started screaming. I demanded to know what the hell was wrong with all of them, how they could do this to me, how they could betray me in such a devastating way. But none of them seemed bothered by my reaction. Alex got out of bed and started getting dressed with this infuriating calm. He told me I didn't get to dictate the rules if I was the one who opened this door. He said I'd spent weeks talking about how people shouldn't be limited to one partner, and he was simply taking my philosophy to its logical conclusion. I tried to explain that this was completely different, that these were my family members, that there were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But Alex said I hadn't mentioned any boundaries when I'd asked for permission to sleep with other men. He said I'd told him the arrangement should be reciprocal. Emma started getting dressed too, telling me I was being hypocritical and dramatic. She said I'd been bragging for weeks about how enlightened and progressive my relationship was, and now I was acting like a jealous child when someone else embraced the same philosophy. My mother was the worst of all. She sat there on my bed, in my home, and told me I should be proud that I'd inspired her to be more honest about her desires. She said she and Emma had both found Alex attractive from the moment they met him, and my open relationship model had given them permission to act on those feelings. I was screaming so loud that neighbors probably heard me, but I didn't care. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I felt like my entire world was collapsing around me. These weren't strangers or distant acquaintances. These were the people I loved most, the people I trusted absolutely, and they'd used my own philosophy against me in the cruelest way possible. Alex finished getting dressed and sat down on the edge of our bed, like we were having a normal conversation. He explained that he'd been thinking about my request for weeks, trying to understand why I thought I deserved to explore connections with other people while expecting him to remain monogamous. He said he'd realized that if the arrangement was truly reciprocal, he should be able to pursue whoever attracted him. I screamed that pursuing my mother and sister wasn't reciprocal, it was sick and twisted. But Alex said I hadn't specified any limitations when I'd asked for an open relationship. He said I'd told him I wanted to explore connections with other men, and he'd decided to explore connections with other women. The fact that those women happened to be related to me was just coincidence. Emma was fully dressed now and gathering her purse like she was getting ready to leave a normal dinner party. She told me I was being incredibly hypocritical for getting upset when someone else embraced the relationship model I'd been promoting. She said I couldn't expect to have multiple partners while demanding that Alex limit himself to only me. I begged Emma to explain how she could do this to her own sister, how she could betray our relationship and our family in such a horrible way. But she said she wasn't betraying anyone. She was being honest about her attraction to Alex instead of suppressing it like society expected her to. My mother was even worse. She lectured me about being selfish and narrow-minded, saying I'd opened the door to non-traditional relationships and then gotten angry when other people walked through it. She said I should be grateful that she'd raised a daughter who was brave enough to challenge social conventions, even if I wasn't mature enough to handle the consequences. Alex said he'd actually been seeing both Emma and my mother for several weeks, ever since our initial conversation about open relationships. He said they'd all agreed that my dinner party would be the perfect opportunity to bring everything out into the open, since I was such a strong advocate for honesty and transparency in relationships. I demanded that they all get out of my house immediately. But Alex reminded me that the lease was in his name, and technically it was his house. He said I was welcome to leave if I was uncomfortable with the new arrangement, but he and his partners weren't going anywhere. Emma kissed Alex goodbye right in front of me, telling him she'd had a wonderful evening and was looking forward to seeing him again soon. My mother did the same thing, thanking him for the lovely dinner and the even better dessert. They were treating the whole situation like a joke, like my pain and humiliation were entertainment for them. As they gathered their things to leave, my mother told me this was a valuable lesson about being careful what you wish for. She said I'd wanted a progressive, open relationship, and now I had one. She suggested I might want to think more carefully about the consequences of my choices in the future. Emma's parting shot was even crueler. She said I'd always been selfish and demanding, expecting everyone else to accommodate my needs while never considering what other people wanted. She said maybe now I'd understand what it felt like to have someone take something important away from me. Looking back, I could see that my request had been selfish and hurtful, even if I hadn't intended it that way. I'd basically told someone who loved me that he wasn't enough to satisfy me, that I needed other men to feel complete. That must have been devastating for Alex to hear, even if his response had been disproportionately cruel. But understanding my mistakes didn't make the consequences any easier to bear. Yes, I'd been selfish and thoughtless in asking for 2 boyfriends, but sleeping with someone's mother and sister wasn't a normal response to relationship problems. Alex had chosen the most psychologically damaging revenge possible, and he'd enlisted my own family members to help him destroy me. The hardest truth to accept was that I might never recover the relationships I'd lost.